everybody. This is Rory Francis, and you're watching another segment of Igniting American Manufacturing. And I'm sitting here with some very talented and slightly intimidating people, and we're going to introduce them in a second. This segment is sponsored by Fusion ATG. So let's get started here. We have Winn Hardin with Manufacturing Matters.
Hello, everybody.
We have Terry Iverson with Champion Now, among other things, and author. We'll talk a little about his books here in a second. And retired Colonel Budihas with Advantage Consulting.
Hey, sir. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. So I want to start with just kind of an opening statement here, and I get very soapboxy about reigniting American manufacturing and reshoring. And the truth of the matter is, you know, globally we're at a precipice with manufacturing and innovation. And in the U.S., it's particularly even more important. We're at an inflection point where we need to decide if we're going to make a concerted effort to reshore and build our manufacturing base again. So the conversations we have here on this show try to address that, the constraints, the pros and the cons, and today we're going to get a little bit into that. And one of our major constraints is workforce development. So these gentlemen could speak on numerous topics. We're going to try and get a brief overlook of what they do, and then we're going to try and discuss workforce development, but we can very easily go down some rabbit holes. I do want to start with, and I just mentioned, Terry is a three-time author, right?
Two times.
Two and a half, right?
2.5,
okay.
There you go.
So,
well, Finding America's Greatest Champion. Champion is an acronym, which we've talked about, change how American manufacturing is perceived in our nation. And this is to address industry, education, students, and parents.
And that 2.5 is a kind of a unique story. So we have a book here with two different covers. I'm going to flip it the right way this time, right?
We do. So, Inspiring Champions in Advanced Manufacturing. This basically addresses both the student and the parent. So it has a parent edition, and then you flip it over, you have the student edition too. There you go. Nice job.
Okay, I got it right.
I got the direction right that
New
time.
Dana White right here.
I had to practice. I got this wrong at a previous episode. So
yeah, that's awesome. But anyway, you know, the fact that, you know, too many young people go into college and they get student loans, and, you know, the subtitle basically says discover the path to a debt-free career. And too many young people are paying a lot of money for, you know, a degree that's not going to, you know, give them a good paying career.
Absolutely.
Necessarily.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's work now segues right into our topic, workforce development. You know, and I've kind of been on a tangent lately. Harry Moser was on a show, and he had a shirt that said, "Make manufacturing cool again." You know, and that actually has come up in conversation several times. And I am definitely a tech nerd. I was under the impression that it's always been cool and that everyone else thought it was cool.
I think it speaks more to you, Rory.
Well, okay. Apparently I am in a very small minority. But the truth of the matter is, you know, and I have some young people coming on in the next couple of weeks to kind of talk about that. Yeah. You know, the factories we build today, you're not going in overalls with a tin lunch pail and coming out covered in soot with lungs full of stuff. They're not dark.
No.
They're really cool places, and they're building innovative things. They're building things that are changing the world, from the EV sector to computer chips. And these are just, they're really, really interesting. And I'm very proud of the work I've done. And, you know, the young people that are in the field now have that consensus too, but a lot of them got there accidentally or by happenstance. They hadn't planned.
Yeah.
Once they got there, they realized that we need to work on that stigma. And you talk and write about vocational training as a stigma. And think you want to give us your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things that I think that is important to note is we have such a big gaming community in the youth. And when you look at the gaming community, which I think is 3 billion worldwide, hard to believe, but it's true. You know, it's a natural transition into the digital world of manufacturing and the computerized world and the automated world. So I think we need to, you know, understand that. But one of the big things I like to talk about, Rory, is that the parents, you know, they're not in the gaming world, and their, you know, opinions are outdated.
Yeah, exactly.
And so one of the reasons that that book exists is more for the parents than the students.
Well, I can tell you, you know, I speak with Emil Gouling about workforce development. I spoke with Harry Moser, and the consensus is the biggest gate for vocational training is the parents. And I can tell you statistically, greater than 89% of parents want their kids to go for a traditional four-year degree.
Right.
What's very disconcerting, and I've seen that survey, and the numbers vary. I've seen it several surveys like that, but it's really where the numbers are. Just in the past couple of months, a survey came out where they interviewed 18 to 20-year-olds that were about their careers, and they were almost at the same numbers. They were like 82 to 87%. 82% said they never considered manufacturing.
Right.
87+% said their parents wanted to go to a traditional degree and discouraged them from going that direction. So it's bad enough the parents have this perception, but they've impressed it on their children, and we have 2 or 3 lost generations where it hasn't been considered. We're at the point where we are right now. And I know you talk about workforce development and the deficiencies and the numbers. Depending on who you ask, anywhere from 3 to 3.8 million work shortage by 2030.
20-25% labor gaps in certain key industries, welding, assembly, machinist, other areas like that. And I just think the focus on perception, that word perception is something that's just so important, because it really is a stigma that, and like so many straw men, when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to automation technology, there's so many misconceptions, right? The companies that are adopting automation technology are far more likely to have cultures that younger generations want to join, right? Their retention, their turnover is so much lower than folks who aren't leveraging technology. And that gets into, there's this gaming connection, just this affinity for technology from our younger generations. And then the other thing is that you can go out there and be a robotic programmer and make, $100,000 to $200,000 within a couple of years of starting this, or a PLC programmer. You can work from home. You got flexibility your parents only dreamed of, and money at a youth that I could have never thought of at that point. Unless you did it the old-fashioned way and inherited it. Which wasn't an option.
Well, Winn, I can tell you, if you can write ladder logic and you understand the INC, then you can come work for me and be commissioned in person. And that 6 figures is very, very attainable very early on.
Absolutely.
So send your resumes.
Without $200,000 in debt coming out of college. That's the other thing.
So I was just going to reinforce. So on Friday last week, I was at an association lunching, and local politicians, so one of the surrounding counties, was talking about they were number 1 in the state of Florida in education for a number of decades, and now they're number 2. So they're still doing well. And she wants to push, manufacturing as an occupation, but which has been identified here. The knowledge gap is in the parents, because the parents are the ones pushing. Yeah, that's great, but you're going to go to said university, so on and so forth. Yeah. But they don't understand that there's huge opportunities in this space. And I love the fact you start off, Rory, like my grandfather in Allentown, Pennsylvania, worked in a steel mill. Those days have changed. So changing the parents' mindset on the opportunities that are out there as an occupation is huge, and then getting it down to the schools, because the second critical vulnerability was the guidance counselors and the educators not even understanding. So in watching other locations I've been stationed around the country and overseas, where there's the tech capability in the schools ingrained there. So for example, one of the schools outside Columbus, Georgia, they have a robotics program. Oh, by the way, Columbus State University started in conjunction with that. About 45 minutes to the west is Auburn University, has a robotics program. So you see a logical pipeline into these occupations that folks may have not seen in the past, probably 10 years ago.
To your point, and those are great. I've had people come in here and talk about, we're still in a degree track in there, and there's a term out there being used, nano degrees and micro certifications. Now, and it's great that they're doing that. And University of Texas has just started a semiconductor degree. ASU's followed suit. Purdue University has done a lot with robotics and smart manufacturing, but they're mostly degree based. There are some certification programs, and I actually read this morning. I'm not really familiar with this school, so I want to make sure I get it right. Georgia Northwestern Technical College, GNTC, and they're working with, this is a great organization, the Coalition for National Coalition for Certification Centers. So they're not only they're doing degree programs, they're doing certification specific to just PLC training, where you can do 6 months to a year and get a skill set, or INC and things of that nature. Now they're taking a step further. They're actually have a program in there where they're training the trainers.
Oh yeah.
to go out. And Amelia Goulden, who couldn't join us today, a good friend, and I talk about that all the time. One of the biggest problems with vocational training is getting a trainer. When you can go out and make 20 years experience, that's 6 figures, maybe 2x. I mean, you're making really, really good to come into a university and make a third if you're lucky. So a lot of those train-the-trainers are retirees, or there's just not enough of them.
Yeah.
But the train-the-trainer program is every bit important. So when I saw this today, and I just read this earlier this morning, I was like, wow, that's a really good one.
Yeah.
And there are some programs like that. And I want to talk to you a little bit about manufacturing, doing some heavy lifting here. Terry, I'm going to come back over here. We're going to talk about the DOT in a second, I promise.
Okay.
So I worked at Tesla with the Robotics Foundation, and I helped write the CTE curriculum. And we went and built labs accordingly. There's some more efforts like how important, and there's a question here, how important is it for industry to sit down with academia and kind of tell them what their needs are, so we're actually getting really good tangible skills?
Well, there's a disconnect. We talked about the parents and the students disconnect, but there's equally as important is a disconnect between education and industry. Industry gets frustrated because education doesn't move quite as fast as industry does. And it's understandable. I've done a lot with education, and I get it. Education gets frustrated with industry because sometimes they don't feel that they're really, getting their, point of the story, so to speak. So we definitely need to have more engagement between industry and education. And if we can solve that disconnect and the education or the parent and student disconnect, then I think, we're going to move the needle, double digits if and when that happens.
Has the needle moved at all in the past?
Yeah, it has. I mean, when I was getting into the industry, the first big recession was '83 that I went through, and a lot of the programs, the schools, technical programs closed, the apprenticeships closed. Offshoring was happening at that time, and now there's a resurgence of technical education in high schools, in colleges. Up in Chicago, where I split time between Chicago and Jacksonville, they're doing a lot of revamping of technical colleges where they're putting on big additions, and same thing with some of the high schools. They're putting in new programs. The problem is you can build it, but they won't come. And so my contention is that we need to do a better job of talking about our industry, talking about the opportunities, because people aren't necessarily making decisions not to follow it. They just don't know about it.
Yeah.
So
It's definitely an awareness problem. We had a gentleman on here, Chris Sexton. He's with Florida State College of Jacksonville. And he was telling me, now they have some certification programs, and they just built a lab, and they have a degree program as well, but they're working on certifications. He's telling me that things are so dynamic, and here's another issue. Things are so dynamic, they'll have a fall course, and by the time the spring comes, 50% of the course has been changed because I just need to, things are that dynamic and moving that quick. And innovation right now with and AI is, we were innovating before and iterating at such a rapid pace. AI is jet fuel. Everybody is jet fuel on the digital transformation. So keeping up and keeping relevant, keeping data. I can only imagine trying to write a curriculum, because you would be writing. So that's just another piece.
But if we can get those foundational skills, the ladder logic, the step programming, all these things that are so critical. I mean, I think, from the industrial side, and I'm not going to take much time because we want to get DoD in here for sure, but there's always been a patchwork solution to training. You've got certain big companies affiliating with the certain local colleges, universities to kind of build those. The whole vocational school faded away, and now is coming back as technical school, such a critical component. What you guys are driving at in terms of consistency throughout the human asset supply chain is just super critical for us to really make a change and respond to the way the United States manufacturing market needs us to respond. And not just for the benefit of the manufacturing companies, but for the benefit of the country and all the people who live here, because making things makes wealth, and that helps keep the United States the best place to be.
Dan D'Amico, formerly with Nucor, and he's now founded the Foundation Coalition for Prosperous America, and he talks about how middle class manufacturing and a prosperous America all go in hand in hand.
Absolutely.
And I've been echoing that ever since I heard him say it. You have mentioned, and I piggyback it, PLCs and ladder logic about 3 times in the past 10 minutes. The truth of the matter is, we are in a digital transformation right now.
Yeah.
We're talking smart manufacturing.
Yeah.
We're talking twin digital thread. But at the core, PLC and ladder logic and now the Internet of Things, those are here and they're here to stay. They're the basis. We're just digitizing them and getting a little more accurate. But so if you can get that core,
Yeah.
you know, it's like working, learning how to use a hammer the right way. You know, okay, it's a base tool. It's the first thing you need to learn. It's your foundation. That foundation's not going there. Digital, like I said, digital transformation is literally just digitizing that and making it a little bit easier. But you need that core underlying. I don't see ladder logic going away anytime soon.
No, I mean, ladder logic is essentially based on the fundamentals of electricity.
Yep.
Right. Essentially. So I mean, none of these fundamentals are going away. I mean, they're powering our.
Well, at the end of the day, PLC is the basis. We have a computer chip back here, I's and O's.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I's and O's. Yes, no's. Responses, and it gets more sophisticated from there. So we're getting a little techie right now.
We are, but just I got to say, we talk about technology and everything. That's been our discussion right here. But we got to call out the fact that Rory painted that picture last night in 4 hours.
I did it a Thursday, but yes, we're out usually on a different set when we have a smaller audience, and I wanted to dress it up a little bit.
So guys, you can be artistic and creative as well as a tech geek. There is possibility for that. It exists.
Thank you, Winn.
Absolutely.
I'm a little red in the face right now.
Well,
all right. We said we were going to get here. So the first time I heard about DoD involved in workforce development, I scratched my head, and then it was explained to me, and the light went on, and I kind of, it's grown on me. I realized really the depth of their involvement in it, and not only the necessity to. So, in your words, why is the Department of Defense so enamored with STEM and workforce development?
So
What's the
why?
intention?
Well, so my last couple of years, I was working with Army Futures Command. That was a creation about 6 years ago of a new command that identified like, hey, Army Futures Command. So we literally forward-looking, forward-acting, and then there's so much to unpack here. So then you throw another overlay on top of that of Ukraine, Russia. And we start to take a look. The U.S. is supporting obviously the Ukrainians in this fight.
Right.
But we say magazine depth. We realize very quickly is we send guided munitions, we send tanks, we send air defense assets out of our own inventory to the Ukrainians. We realized, wow, our industry's ability to keep up on resupplying not only the current set of what that was that they sent overseas, but future stuff was divested since the Cold War. So that's put us in a very unique position to go, where's our manufacturing capacity for DoD defense across our nation in a high demand need? Yeah. And you think about this is the Ukrainians fighting the Russians, which is pretty big, but in a global world war, and our pacing threat is China. If we was to have a fight, how could we mobilize the nation from a defense perspective in order to produce the material that we would need in order to fight such a near-peer threat? So there's so much to unpack there, but we realize that our civilian capacity to provide the capabilities we need is atrophied over time. And how are we gonna address that? And it can't be Back to the Future. We can't go, hey, during the 1930s, 40s, we did X. We were producing one B-29 like every 5 minutes. We were producing one ship every day. It's got to be brought to the future. What do we need in order to be successful? And do we have the right labor workforce that can produce the things that we need in order to be successful?
The tech aspect of it, and there's a couple of things I want to get into here a little bit. You're talking about direct military, physical equipment manufacturing. Yeah. But we talk about, having the state-of-the-art military chip, and other folks not having it.
Oh, absolutely.
And then we just talk about us having some of the state-of-the-art chips because we need to protect our supply chain. So I know the DoD has direct involvement, and we want to keep ourselves, comfortable that we can supply ourselves in our dire need. But I think they're also involved in it, looking at protecting our supply chain as far as digital supply chain.
Absolutely.
And our physical supply chain, from pharmaceuticals to things of that nature. Is that a part of it as well?
100%. That's the level of complexity of this issue, right? One of the top 10 things we take a look at manufacturing from a defense perspective, one of the elements in there is cybersecurity and cyber capacity, and that includes the supply chain. Because our doctrine that's came out in the last couple of years, before we talk about doctrine, we're going to be on the battlefield in this said location, some foreign land, and we're going to be fighting. But in reality of it, we decided, whoa, based on cyber and space, you're going to be attacked from the homeland all the way forward, and it's not just going to be the people wearing uniforms. It's going to be those folks working in the factories, at their homes. It's going to be the power supply. It's going to be the sewage and water and everything else. So the level of complexity, it's not that one thing using a Clausewitzian type of term of center of gravity. It's going to be a multi things that can bring us to our knees. You think about the Colonial Pipeline a couple years ago, where a threat actor attacked our gas supply here in the southeast, and that brought us to our knees.
He got into a PLC. He got into the instrumentation. He got into their SCADA. Literally, that's what he did. So I'm going to go back to, we talk about digital transformation and we talk about smart manufacturing.
Right.
And one of the nanoscent tools of smart manufacturing is the industrial Internet of Things. We're putting more devices and more gauges and meters and things in our factory to automate for smart manufacturing. It also, because it's web-based, it creates vulnerabilities.
Big time.
And then you take in, where does that data go? It's sitting in data centers. So we need to physically protect our data centers. And you and I just recently had a conversation, and this was kind of eye-opening to me, that 85% of our threat on data is not to the data center, it's an underwater cabling.
I know.
That was I was kind of an eye-opener, and when I thought about it,
well, it makes sense, right? I mean, that's always been the attack the communication lines, not the communication center.
Oh, absolutely.
You blow up the communication center, but if you want to be nefarious or surveillance, covert.
So we need to protect our physical data centers, and I've actually been involved in building data centers and some of the security around that, and it's very, very elaborate.
Right.
But there's still vulnerabilities. But then underwater cabling. So the U.S. and England, particularly Great Britain, lead the world in underwater cabling. The Chinese are trying to catch up really, really quick. But their biggest concern is a lot of their data comes across our lines. That's one area that we excel at, and data centers we excel at. Again, Great Britain and the U.S. Lead the world in data center capacity and state of the art. So we've got that one down. We've got our weaknesses. We have our strengths. We need to tout our horns. So DOD and the Department of Energy as well, they have a piece in this. Ton of funding out there right now, from the CHIP Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Science Act. You're really getting involved in STEM. You're going grassroots, which speaks to Terry and stuff. Maybe you two gentlemen can talk to me a little bit about the necessity for our youth and STEM and CTE training. Who goes
Terry.
first?
Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
Well,
you wrote the book.
One of the things that one of the things I'll point out is we started a camp, and you were talking about training the trainers, right? So we're trying to introduce manufacturing concepts to middle school children, students, and what we're trying to do also is use high school student CTE students to mentor the middle school kids. And then what we're also trying to do is either have the host be either a technical college or an industry member. So we're trying to have the food chain literally from 10 years old to 65 years old, and have industry mentor the technical colleges mentor the high school kids mentor the middle school kids, who then will become the high school kids to mentor the next group. So we call this Camp Champ, but case in point, there's so many different things, and anything we can do as a country to get everybody on the same page, we need to do. And I know buildsubmarines.com and Blue Forge Alliance, they're doing great things from what I'm told that I've seen. And I don't know if you want to speak to that.
What I would say is, the big thing when we started at the beginning of this, culture. That's changing culture, right? To go, this is what we do. It's not that one-off here, but it's funny. As some of the self-reflection, listen to everybody talk here today, at a former location that I was working at, it was interesting. So we had a robotics directorate, and great Americans. Most of them are age probably 45 or older, and really a few of them had a little bit of experience in robotics, but not much.
Right.
But they understand the conceptual. They understood, hey, this is how we want to employ the robots. We don't necessarily know how they work per se, but there's a little bit of art and science where you got to have a rudimentary understanding, kind of talk about the basics, in order to have the foundations to kind of advance the concept within the capability of technology, or provide the demand signal to industry to say we need the following capabilities in our robotics. I think we need to pull together that life, if you will, that development chain of folks, where we would see in the future in that robotics requirements folks that we'd have folks in their mid-20s, late 20s, and then they would grow up the next set of folks instead of having an older population. Again, great Americans working really hard, doing a lot of great things.
Yeah.
But I think that going back to that precipice piece, we're on the precipice of understanding that we need a workforce, and this is mostly civilian workforce, by the way, for the few military uniform folks, because we realize, like, well, they're uniform folks, we change them out a job so many years to the point where you need to have that civilian continuity over time and space in order to kind of advance the technology with the concept together as a package deal. And then there's another piece that the military is kicking around, is this idea of we need a robotics, we call it military occupational specialty. We need a career field in robotics.
Yeah.
I think we've been there for the last couple of years, but we just haven't pulled the trigger because the military
We need some
culture.
standardization is what we need. And,
Yeah.
and that's where I got excited when I saw about that the training center at the university we talked about earlier, a national coalition for certification that's recognized. There's a lot of and I belong to a plethora of different trade organizations, and I kind of wish they would truncate and save me a little bit of money, a little bit of time, and start working together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I see a coalition, a national coalition for certifications, something along that line, and maybe it's an associate's degree, maybe it is a bachelor's degree, but something that's standardized that we can say, hey, this person's qualified in this. I want to touch on this. We talked about our military, and we talked about that civilian population, the continuity. There's another piece of that, and we have and Winn, I'm going to ask you a little bit about some of our workforce deficiencies in numbers. Using our transitioning veterans, and we're in Jacksonville, Florida. There's a few Navy people around here.
Yeah.
They
Putting in my
got a
little
couple
muscle.
just walked down the hall. Actually, I'm pretty sure they have. If you're in the Navy nuke fleet. They know PLC ladder logic.
Oh, absolutely.
They know.
But they can work in power plants all day long. They've even got a better gig.
They can go work in a semiconductor facility. They
Yeah.
can go work in an EV factory.
For sure.
They have that skill set. There's not very, very little upskilling with them. Maybe they need to learn some new acronyms.
Who doesn't?
But they have the skill set.
Yeah.
There's just a natural transition there, and that's when the numbers are pretty intimidating, and probably the biggest constraint to reshoring and the biggest constraint to igniting American manufacturing and a prosperous is lack of a workforce. You want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I mean, we've done so many analysis for various clients where we're like, you've got a 20% labor gap that's going to hit you between 25 and 35, depending on where these things, and then you start gaming out, okay, what does that mean in terms of OT? What does that mean in terms of increased injuries at work because these people are working too hard, too long? Long-term therapeutic problems, carpal tunnel and other things doing, and that's why we always talk about robotics in particular, but automation in general is doing the dirty, dangerous, and dull jobs, right? These are not. When we're talking about leveraging automation and technology to fill labor gaps, we are not talking about taking jobs away from hardworking Americans or other people around the world. That's not what happens. Right. These companies that leverage this technology grow, and they inevitably have bigger headcounts after they adopt the technology than before.
Right. Cobots.
Absolutely.
I know you know quite a bit about. Talk a little bit about cobots and employing cobots in manufacturing.
Absolutely. Cobots is exploding. Cobot refers to collaborative robot, right? So it's a robot that is getting more and more. In the original cobots moved slower. They couldn't lift a lot of weight. They would use a force sensor to be able to know when it hit an object, so it didn't just keep going. Industrial robot's just going to take your head right off if you get in the way, right? I mean, it's going to do its path, and and that's all there is to it. But we're getting a lot smarter about putting these safety sensors and systems into them. So, and cobots actually come in a lot less. You might be able to get a cobot at entry point, say $25,000 for a small manufacturing. This is opening up the vast majority, 80% of manufacturing in the U.S. is done by small and medium enterprises, not by the giant globals, right? And these are the folks who desperately need, they have huge labor shortages. They're not large companies, so their culture makes it maybe a little bit more difficult to bring in new kids and new employees into their system. But they're the backbone of our production capability in the United States of America. So the cobot brings in automation at a lower price point, and you don't have to have all these safety systems and fences and more real estate on your production floor. So it's really a key component. And then when you throw in AI, which is allowing you to program this robot talking to it. Okay,
Machine learning.
Yeah, machine learning. I mean, we're starting to see the initial programming using large language models, like folks are familiar with Alexa and with Siri and all these others. You're going to have the ability to basically say, okay, I want you to sand that surface to this level of RMS or whatever it may be. Follow that curve. Make sure that all 6 of those fasteners are inserted in that carburetor or that automotive component.
Another piece of this,
Yeah.
the machine learning goes a little further. You could say that to it,
Yeah.
but you ask it to do it again, it actually gets better.
It does.
And you ask it to do slightly different, it takes all that data and it starts truncating it and starts collating it, and it actually is getting smarter as it goes.
It is.
It is self-learning. It's self-learning. So machine learning,
Self-optimization. Yeah, learning and self-optimizing.
Deep learning.
Right, right.
Deep learning is all about algorithms. And so the more you do, the more data you give it, the better it gets, the smarter it gets.
Without question. And manufacturing is finally starting to turn that corner and realize that they have to release. Manufacturing's been slow to evolve over the years.
Yes, they have.
And we talk about wanting interoperability and everything, but traditionally manufacturers have resisted that because they want you to buy their bots, right? As the PLCs and everything else. But we're starting to see some of that standardization, and a lot of the companies are buying into that. And more, just as importantly, if not more so, is that the manufacturing folks are letting their production data get outside beyond the plant walls so that those AI models can really optimize.
One of the business models was, I'm going to build a smart manufacturing. I'm going to know all the hardware. I'm going to know all the software.
Yep.
I'm going to know all the interconnects. And no one's really been. They typically fail because there's just too many failure points. Taking the best, industry known standards. This is not a plug. Siemens has been in the INC industry for forever.
Yeah.
I think they have a head start. They have some really cool tools, but they're allowing other people to work. Having that interoperability, having different software companies tweak and blend. There's some risk there, with IP, but I think people are realizing it's the way to go. Very rarely do you see a standalone turnkey. It just doesn't really work.
Well, and for everyone who doesn't know your background, you're in the best position to talk about that because you've been out there helping folks spec, develop, commission these manufacturing plans.
Implement.
Implement from Tesla in the States to Tesla in Berlin, all over the world, and many, many other places. So the reason why you probably want to listen to Rory when it comes to
You got that right.
I painted that too. Well, folks, I think we could probably go in circles all day. Let's last word, Terry. Anything you want to finish with? Well, you know what? Let me help you here.
Okay.
Champion Now, great organization.
Thank you.
Maybe you can hook up with the DoD and here one of these days we can have that conversation.
Okay.
We want to get a hold of Champion Now and look at your website and maybe donate or volunteer or get involved or just ask some questions. Where can they get that information?
Well, during the Machine Tool Show, I reached out to a number of leaders in the manufacturing sector, in the machine tool sector and distribution. And I started for the first time approaching and said, look, Champion Now is championnow.org is our website. And yes, we need volunteers, and time is money, and some people don't have the time. And I reached out to a number of people and said, look, in order to grow the organization, which is primarily volunteer, we need to hire staff. There's a number of things we need to do. IMEC has funded us for these camps I mentioned earlier, but we need industry to jump in and invest into our infrastructure so that we can keep doing and do more things nationally. And so yes, if people's time is very valuable, which of course it is, donations are great, very gratefully accepted.
Right, and that allows those companies to tap into that pipeline for future employment and labor development. So that's super
Absolutely.
critical. You're going to get something for that.
So when B2B
Yeah.
and manufacturing matters.
Yeah.
Closing comments?
Closing comments are simply that I just feel lucky as anyone could possibly be. I mean, honestly, we need to remember that we're moving in the right direction. The world is doing good. There's bumps and hills on every path, but we're heading to a very exciting future.
Yeah.
And I hope we can all embrace that. And one of the takeaways that you've said over and over is, guys and ladies, you don't need to go to college to be successful. Okay, college is a great time. Don't get me wrong. Have a great time, but you can crush it. Just with a little bit of technical learning and background, and have a wonderful and raise a great family and live in the greatest country in the world. So that's, in summary, that's where I'm at.
I'm going to piggyback what you said. It is an extremely exciting time in manufacturing, and it's why
Yes.
I haven't retired.
Yeah.
I love working with young people. I love helping them get to where they need to be. But if you look at the innovation curve from the start of the Industrial Revolution, it went like this. Well, right now it's pretty much vertical. It is straight up. It's changing daily, and sometimes even a little quicker. It's just, manufacturing is cool. I'm calling me a nerd.
truly
Manufacturing
is.
is just cool,
Yeah.
and I'm having a great time.
Yeah.
I'm glad you are. So DOD, a big contributor,
sir.
and helping us. Next steps for DOD.
Next steps for DoD. That's a great question. So we, historically, you look back, we had all these defense type companies, the military-industrial complex, if I can use that term, up until the Cold War, and then we divested and we went to the Big Five, and I'll let people figure out who the Big Five are. And then now, the last 5 to 8 years, we said, hey, we need to invest in smaller companies for a couple of reasons. One, they're more agile in thought, and they're more agile in action. So I work with a company, part of Advantage, I work with PM13 Defense Consulting. So people are like, what do they do? Well, it's 14 consultants, 11 of them a heavy acquisitions background. We help small companies that make stuff try to do work with the Department of Defense. And their biggest thing they call the Valley of Death. You make something great, but how do I get into the Department of Defense? How do I get into the Department of Energy? How do I get into Border Patrol? You need somebody that can pathfind to show you, this is how we get to whoever we need to get to in order to have a conversation to provide a fill for a gap. Because the last thing you want is, if there's no gap and no requirement, then you're just selling something that nobody wants to buy. And there's other folks out there that will take your money and say, yeah, Rory, we're going to sell that to the Department of Defense. Just give us 2 more years. But the reality of it is, like we had conversations with the founder, is can we take that company and can we move them forward before we sign a contract with them? If we can't, then sorry. But if we can, let's do that, because that Valley of Death is gigantic. And if you're a civilian-based company, some of these clients are overseas in I'd say friendly nations that want to do business here. They just don't know how to negotiate that, because we don't teach that in college. We don't teach that in high school.
ITAR and other.
ITAR, yeah, exactly. So for defense, I love your comment at the beginning about the precipice. My analogy is like, we ain't even gone to the beach yet. Once we get in the waves, then we're starting to feel the churn and the iteration of manufacturing and technology. So we're getting ready to get to the beach, and then we're gonna go down this journey. And my last thing I'll say is, after spending time in 52 different countries, I think a cultural change has to happen. Spending 6 years in Germany, I don't want to say we want to cut and paste their model onto our society, but we probably need some reflection to go, why does that work? Because on a flight here a couple years back, sitting next to this guy in his late 30s, owns a prosthetic business that's actually been around for over 150 years. He bought the business, and he was bringing a bunch of interns, if you will, from Germany, outside of Stuttgart, over to New York to go meet with different companies that do prosthetic. They make prosthetics, and it was going about and just learning more about this technology. Then the level of precision, because I asked, are you in there with a hammer and a chisel? He's like, no, it's all, also 3D printing, but it is manufacturing at a precision level. Yeah. We know the Germans like precision, that they are leveraging the level of knowledge and technology they had. They just blew me away. It was impressive.
The Germans are very impressive when it comes to manufacturing. And I was in Stuttgart, and I was in Munich. Got to visit TUM, a technical university of Munich, and their robotics lab. One of their advantages, they have a different attitude towards vocational training. They see a trade or apprenticeship as equal to a degree. And a lot of them go to the same school for 2 years, and they pick degree track or whatever. They have a dual track, and are actually going to be visiting some universities over there. And so, with the thought that maybe I could bring some educators and maybe some senators and all that, and say, hey, why don't you take a look at this? You know, it's a good thing. And it comes down to, and you mentioned 2 or 3 times culture, and I speak about culture quite a bit. There needs to be a cultural shift in this country. We need to rethink our culture of vocational training. We need to think, and you know, I used deliberately 2 different words. You know, globally we're on a precipice, meaning we're standing on the edge. The U.S. is at an inflection point, which means we have a choice. We can walk away from the edge and step away from manufacturing and continue on the path we are, or we can re-embrace it. That's the inflection point. That's the choice, and that's a cultural shift. So, so culture is, you know, a huge part of this. And I want to thank you, gentlemen. Academia, government, and industry. It's going to take all 3 working in conjunction. You gentlemen did a great job representing your respective areas today. So I want to thank you so much for your time. So,
My pleasure.
Thanks,
this
sir.
is Rory Francis, and you've been watching Igniting American Manufacturing.